There's a story that connects the rain-soaked mill towns of Lancashire to the roaring stadiums of Tokyo. It's a story about grappling, real grappling, and how a working-class English fighting art crossed the world and changed combat sports forever.
And it starts, as so many good English stories do, in the mud. In the 19th century, the industrial north of England had its own martial art, though nobody called it that. They called it catch as catch can. Grab hold of anything you can, take the man down, make him submit.
This wasn't sport for gentlemen. This was fairground wrestling, pub wrestling, mining town wrestling. Lancashire, Cumbria, Wigan, these places produced grapplers the way Sheffield produced steel. Hard men, technically brilliant, who could tie you in knots and make you tap before you understood what had happened to you.
The rules were beautifully simple. No striking. Everything else was fair game. Hooks, cranks, neck locks, leg locks. Submissions that wouldn't appear in mainstream martial arts for another 100 years. These Victorian-era wrestlers had already figured them all out.
And the epicenter of it all was a small gym in Wigan, run by a man called Billy Riley. They called it the Snake Pit, not because of any decoration on the walls, but because of what happened to you inside. You went in, you got twisted up like a snake had wrapped around you, and if you survived, you learned to do it to the next man.
The Snake Pit attracted wrestlers from all over the world. It was the finishing school, the place where good grapplers became terrifying grapplers. And it produced one student who would change the entire trajectory of combat sports in Japan.
His name was Karl Istaz, but the world would know him as Karl Gotch. Belgian by birth, but trained in the Wigan catch tradition under Billy Riley himself. Gotch was, by all accounts, an extraordinary physical specimen, tremendously strong, technically immaculate, and absolutely devoted to legitimate grappling.
In the 1950s, Gotch went to America and worked the professional wrestling circuit. But here's the thing about Gotch. He couldn't pretend. He couldn't do the theatre of it. When he was told to lose a match, he'd sometimes just refuse to cooperate and shoot on his opponent for real. This made him rather unpopular backstage, as you can imagine.
But it made him a god in Japan. And I mean that literally. When Gotch arrived in Japan, the wrestling world there was electrified. Here was a man who could actually do the things that professional wrestlers only pretended to do. The Japanese called him Kamisama, the god of wrestling. It wasn't hyperbole. To them, he was exactly that.
And this is where the story takes its crucial turn. Gotch began training Japanese wrestlers in the catch style. Real submissions, real technique. Among his students and disciples was a young man called Antonio Inoki, who would become the single most important figure in Japanese combat sports history.
Inoki absorbed Gotch's catch wrestling philosophy, that real fighting ability mattered, that a wrestler should be able to actually fight. In 1976, Inoki did something that shocked the world. He challenged Muhammad Ali to a fight, the actual Muhammad Ali, and Ali accepted.
The fight itself was bizarre. Ali mostly stayed standing while Inoki lay on his back, kicking at Ali's legs for 15 rounds. Critics called it a farce. But that misses the point entirely. Inoki had established something. The idea that different martial arts could and should be tested against each other. This was decades before the UFC made the same argument.
From Inoki's vision grew something called the UWF, the Universal Wrestling Federation, in the 1980s. This was professional wrestling that looked increasingly like real fighting. Submissions were real, strikes were real, or very close to real. The worked elements were stripped away, layer by layer, until what remained was essentially mixed martial arts.
The UWF splintered in the early 90s, and from its fragments emerged the true pioneers of Japanese MMA. Pancrase, founded in 1993, named after the ancient Greek martial art pankration, featured real fights with an emphasis on submissions. Many of its founders were catch wrestlers through the Gotch lineage.
Shuto emerged from the same ecosystem. So did Rings, Masakatsu Funaki's organization. All of these promotions had catch wrestling DNA running through their veins. The Japanese grappling tradition wasn't an imported version of Brazilian jiu-jitsu or American wrestling. It was English catch, filtered through Gotch, through Inoki, through the UWF.
And then, in 1997, came Pride Fighting Championships. Pride was held in the great arenas of Japan, the Tokyo Dome, the Saitama Super Arena, in front of tens of thousands of fans who understood grappling at an almost intuitive level, because they'd been watching catch-influenced wrestling for 40 years.
Pride became the greatest MMA promotion the world has ever seen. Grand Prix tournaments, open-weight fights, a rule set that favored action and aggression, and its most beloved fighter, the man who embodied everything Pride stood for, was a catch wrestler.
Kazushi Sakuraba, the Gracie Hunter, a relatively small man competing at middleweight who systematically dismantled the legendary Gracie family, the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He beat Royler Gracie. He beat Renzo Gracie. He fought Royce Gracie for 90 minutes in one of the most extraordinary fights ever held.
And Sakuraba's style? Catch wrestling. He came through the pro wrestling system, trained in the UWF lineage, a direct descendant of the tradition that Karl Gotch had brought from Wigan. When Sakuraba twisted Renzo Gracie's arm until it broke, he was using techniques that Billy Riley's students would have recognized from 100 years earlier.
There's something almost poetic about it. The Gracies had spent decades proving that their Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was the most effective grappling art in the world. And then, a Japanese catch wrestler, trained in a tradition that originated in the north of England, showed that the submission game had been played at an elite level long before anyone in Brazil had heard of it.
It's worth pausing on what makes catch wrestling distinctive. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, magnificent as it is, developed largely from judo, itself a refinement of older Japanese arts. It emphasizes fighting from the guard, from the back, controlling position. Catch wrestling has a different philosophy entirely. It's about domination from the top, about riding, staying heavy on your opponent, and about submissions from everywhere, especially painful ones.
Neck cranks, can openers, crossfaces, toe holds. Catch wrestlers accumulated an armory of submissions that were considered too brutal for sport judo and too unglamorous for Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But in a real fight, they worked. They worked devastatingly well. And in Pride, where the rules allowed almost anything on the ground, catch wrestlers thrived.
Beyond Sakuraba, the catch wrestling influence permeated Japanese MMA. Josh Barnett, the American heavyweight who became a Pride and NJPW star, was a devoted catch wrestler who trained directly in the lineage. Minoru Suzuki, one of the founders of Pancrase, was a catch wrestler. The entire philosophical framework of Japanese MMA, that fighting should be real, that technique should be tested, came from catch.
And here's what I find most remarkable about this whole story. The Snake Pit in Wigan has been described as the first MMA gym. Think about that. A small room above a pub in a Lancashire mill town, where men learned to wrestle in the 1800s, was arguably the birthplace of the global phenomenon we now call mixed martial arts.
Billy Riley's gym closed in the late 20th century, but its legacy extends from Wigan to Tokyo, from the Lancashire Fairgrounds to the Saitama Super Arena. Every time a fighter shoots for a double leg and transitions to a kimura, every time a commentator talks about catch wrestling technique, they're talking about something that began in the rain and the mud of northern England.
It's a reminder that martial arts don't develop in isolation. They travel. They cross-pollinate. English catch went to Japan and met judo and karate and sumo. And from that collision came something entirely new, the most exciting era of fighting the world has ever seen.
Pride is gone now, bought by the UFC in 2007. But its spirit lives on in every Japanese MMA event, in every catch wrestling seminar, in every fighter who values submissions over points. The thread that runs from Lancashire to the land of the rising sun hasn't broken. It's just woven itself into the fabric of modern combat sports.
From Billy Riley's Snake Pit to the Tokyo Dome. From the fairgrounds of Wigan to the bright lights of Pride. It's one of the great untold stories of sporting history, and it starts, as it should, with two men on a mat and the simple challenge: catch me if you can.